plane took off, soaring into the sky as the sun died on the horizon. All was safe, all parts working. Wheels stored safely as the streaming sound of pressure encased them. He looked out of the window and watched the ground give way. He sighed. He'd hoped for a failure. Maybe later when they were out over the ocean. No chance of rescue there. No one ever survived a plane crashing into the sea. Closing his eyes, he saw their face, lost and troubled as the chaos of the street bustled by. The taxi had hurried them, throwing his bags into the boot hastily before cars had honked behind. They had said their goodbyes already upstairs, held on to each other as the tears threatened. At least he had held on. He was unsure now how hard they had pulled him to them. Deep inside his brain a voice had whispered, "They want you to leave." Opening his eyes, he saw the seatbelt sign switch off, the little bing sounding all around him, but nowhere in particular. The plane levelled off and he saw land corrode into the ocean, the lights from the city behind already blurring into a distant memory. People got up, walking up the gangway as if their restrictiveness demanded a rebellion in movement. He turned again to face the window, the little tears of condensation streaking backward like the ones in his eyes. The flight was uneventful, and despite his longing did not crash into a blazing wreckage into the sea. He was somewhat thankful. No need for others to descend into nothingness because of his own wants and needs. The country had changed now, of course, and he felt like a stranger in his own land. He felt as if he had outgrown this little island, when in truth, he had already shrunken into ambivalence. The next few weeks were a haze to him. He slept longer than his body needed. He ate less than what was required. The maddening howls of loneliness engulfed, playing out a wicked pageant each night. Pagan dances of despair trooped through his mind as he imagined the worst, and the weeks fell away into months. The sun rose and died each day, giving way to the moon, which seemed more elusive and tauntful, appearing and disappearing with differing brilliances. And nothing changed. No word came, no celestial movement of fate. He prayed, of course, every day, wishing, hoping, threatening, apologising. Words tumbled from his mouth like a waterfall, lost in the roar of tears that welcomed the rising pool of pain. He was confused and sad, these descriptions falling short of the abject horror that they encompassed. He got up late one Wednesday. His bed had become a grave and he pushed away the covers like soil from his skin. The weather was grey and he saw little movement outside his window. He could hear the birds whistling their busy tunes and saw a couple of collared doves pecking away at the grassy bank on the side of the house. The birds circled, one seeming to protect the other as it scoured the grasses for something. This was his life, he thought there in that moment. The tragedy of nothingness. The on-repeatness of filling the hours that stretched like days. Sitting down on his bed, he joined his hands together. They had marks on now, of course, bloodied scabs that were struggling to heal. Punches to the ground and walls of frustration. His hands stung when he washed them, always, bits of skin peeling off and disappearing down the drain to their own hellish adventure. Mostly he would pray in his head, but this morning the words came forth strong, if not shaky. He prayed for others, for those he loved. He asked why his circumstances refused to alter. He prayed to be sent the need to change the situation. If God was refusing to give him what he needed, then at least give him the chance to change it for himself. He saw the light, felt the feel of God's hands upon him, and the trickle into his heart. His prayer lasted a long time. The doves had flown away by the time he had opened his eyes again, and the light rain had begun to pepper his window. The house groaned around in its ordinariness. Things were quiet, things were the same. He went about the day, holding on to something which he would never tell anyone, like something stolen and now hidden in his pocket, his buried secret in his heart which struggled to beat in a comfortable rhythm. The day came and went, the tasks and encounters rose and fell with the usual absurdity. It wasn't until the following night when what had tucked away bloomed again, a flower of thought that had grown from the thick mud of despair. He had played the game of his life, by the rules he had never agreed to. He was of service each day, giving and giving, yet never receiving. It never used to bother him, for he had much to give. But when you lose everything, you become stricter on what you give away. Now he felt like the coconut husks in his garden, pecked at each day by the birds of life, strips of him torn away, revealing nothing underneath. His prayers had gone unanswered, but he stopped that thought then. No, this was not true. His prayers had been answered when he prayed for others. When he gave and prayed and wanted the best for other people, they got what they needed. Even the rotten ones he was obliged to love, as if blood bound them in an unspoken covenant. Prayer works, but not for him. When he wanted, no, needed something, it never came to him. It was as if the gates of heaven had closed to him in a display of much unfairness. Why was he so beyond getting what he needed to make it through another day? The thought stuck in his head like food stuck in a throat, uncomfortable and unpleasant. He was angry at God, but who wasn't at times? He felt more than anger though, a betrayal almost. He fell asleep that night, not pooled in his own tears like always, but shaken in a fevered dream of reckoning. He woke early, the rhythm of his heart thundering him awake. His phone was silent, barren. Nothing in the night had sprung forth despite the difference in hours. What were they, 7 hours behind? They lived their day while he slept dreaming of them. They dreamt of something else while he navigated through the day thinking of nothing but them. Rolling out of his bed, he went to the bathroom to wash his hands, purifying his body, washing away the dreams and nightmares. What reflected was a surprise to him. A little light glistened in his eyes, and more haloed above him. He turned suddenly, hoping to catch a trail of it around his skull, but it seemed to follow him, quick as a flash. He felt it then, a sudden strength lift within his bones like they were being pumped with a magical force. He made to pray, but remembered suddenly and abstractly that God should not be called upon in a bathroom, negative spaces. Running from the room, he collapsed onto the landing, the banister cast an array of light over him like prison bars. He watched as they seemed to lift upwards, the sun disappearing behind a cloud. The bars faded, and he closed his eyes. He pictured the world above in his mind, the ascent of a man who had become so troubled and desperate. Hands guided him. Little voices pushed him further until he was at the gates of heaven. With one push, the gates parted. He opened his eyes there and bowed to give thanks. He let the words tumble out, washing appreciation over his life. How long he remained, he had not known. The bars of light did not return, but when he stood, he noticed the sun was hovering off in the distance now beyond his window. He wiped the tears away and stood in his new world, just as his phone in the other room began to ring.